He is Don Lucien Moretti, a man whose name alone strikes fear into the hearts of the entire city. And tonight, he decides to bring a maid to a high society ball, not out of respect, but to make a fool of himself. Alara Vale, the quietest girl in the mansion, will stand among billionaires and politicians like an outcast. That's his plan. But Lucien doesn't know that the woman he intends to use as his amusement might be the only one capable of destroying him or saving him. Like and comment on the city you're viewing to let me know how far this story has progressed. Don't miss a second. The night Lucien Moretti decided to humiliate Alara Vale, he dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than she earned in a year and stood at the top of the staircase watching her scrub the marble floor on her hands and knees. He didn't say anything to her directly. He never did. He spoke to his assistant Marcus, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, who had learned to translate the Dawn's silences into actionable instructions. Tell the girl she's coming to the Hargrove Gala tomorrow night. Marcus blinked. Sir? You heard me. She's the housemaid, sir. She cleans the... I know what she does. Lucien straightened his cufflinks without looking up. Tell her to find something to wear, something from the staff closet. I don't care. He walked away before Marcus could say another word. Below, Alara continued scrubbing. She hadn't looked up once. Either she hadn't heard, or she'd learned a long time ago that looking up in this house cost more than it was worth. Marcus came down the stairs slowly, the way a man walks towards something he doesn't want to be part of. He stood at the edge of the marble until Alara sat back on her heels and looked at him. She was 28, maybe 29, difficult to pin down. Her face was plain in the way that a face becomes plain when it has worked very hard to be forgettable. Dark hair pulled tight, no jewelry, eyes that noticed things but didn't volunteer the fact that they were noticing. Mr. Moretti would like you to accompany him to an event tomorrow evening, Marcus said carefully. Alara stared at him. A charity gala at the Hargrove Hotel. She looked down at the bucket of gray water beside her knee, then back at him. I don't understand. Neither do I, Marcus said quietly. Then louder, in the voice he used when he was being watched. 8 o'clock, dress appropriately. He left before she could ask anything else. She stayed on her knees for a long moment after he was gone. The marble was cold through her uniform. Somewhere above, a door closed with the precise, heavy click of a man who had already moved on to other thoughts. Alara Vale picked up her brush and went back to scrubbing. The Moretti estate sat on the northern edge of the city, where old money met new crime, and the two had long ago stopped pretending to be different things. The house had 14 rooms that Alara cleaned, 4 that she was not permitted to enter, and 1, the small storage room behind the kitchen where her cot was wedged between a water heater and a shelf of cleaning supplies. That was entirely hers. She'd been here 11 months. Before that, a hotel in Baltimore. Before that, 3 years in a city whose name she no longer said aloud even in her own head. The staff was small and tight and had made a collective unspoken decision early on that Alara was not worth the social effort, not unkind exactly, just absent. There was Carmen, the cook, who was loud and territorial about the kitchen and occasionally left an extra bread roll on Alara's dinner plate without explanation. There was Davi, the groundskeeper, who smoked by the east gate every evening and nodded at her when their paths crossed. There was Tina, who did the laundry and had once, in a moment of wine-softened generosity, told Alara that she had a look about her, before apparently regretting it and changing the subject. Nobody talked to her much. That was fine. That was the design. After Marcus left, Alara finished the floor and then stood in the small laundry corridor going through the hanging staff uniforms with methodical, unhurried hands. There was one dress, dark navy, long-sleeved, clearly someone's donation from 3 seasons ago, that was cut simply enough to pass for intentional. She held it up in the dim light, checking the hem, the buttons. Carmen found her there, leaned against the door frame with a dish towel over her shoulder and her arms crossed. He's taking you to the Hargrove thing, Carmen said. Not a question. Marcus told you? Marcus tells me everything. It's the only way he copes. Carmen studied the dress. That's not going to work. It's what they have. I know what they have. I'm saying it won't work for what he's doing. Alara lowered the dress. What is he doing? Carmen looked at her for a moment, the way you look at someone before deciding how much honesty to spend. He's been having a hard few months. The Ferretti family's been making noise about territory. The de Cortez people sent a message last week. I don't know the details. Marcus doesn't tell me everything, just the parts that make him anxious, which lately is everything. She paused. Men like Lucien, when they feel things slipping, they do something visible, something that reminds people what they are. And taking me accomplishes that. Carmen didn't deny it. He wants to walk in with someone people will look at and understand something about him immediately. Alara set the navy dress back on the rack. Something like, "This is a man who does whatever he wants and answers to no one," she said. That's about right. There was a silence in which the water heater ticked and somewhere outside Davi's rake scraped along the stone path. "Does that bother you?" Carmen asked. There was something careful in the question, like she expected the answer to be complicated. "No," Alara said, and then after a beat, "Does he expect me to be afraid?" Carmen looked at her a moment longer than the question required. "I think that might be the point," she said, and pushed off the doorframe and went back to her kitchen. The Hargrove Hotel had been built in 1921 by a railroad baron with more money than restraint, and it had spent the 100-odd years since becoming exactly the kind of place where people went to be seen being present. The ballroom on the 4th floor held 400 guests comfortably and was famous for a chandelier system that dropped 14,000 crystals in a cascade pattern that had been called, at various points, breathtaking, obscene, and a fire hazard. The Hargrove Charity Gala raised money for causes that changed every year according to what was fashionable, and it raised enormous amounts of it, and the causes were more or less beside the point. What the gala actually was, the single most concentrated gathering of East Coast power in any given calendar year. Governors and their lawyers, CEOs and their fixers, old family wealth and first-generation wealth, and a certain category of men whose wealth had no publicly listed origin. Union bosses who had lunch with senators, senators who had dinner with men whose names didn't appear in newspapers. Lucien Moretti had attended for 7 consecutive years. He had never once been the least powerful person in the room. He had also never once, in 7 years, brought anyone with him. This was known. This was part of his particular brand of authority. The man who arrived alone because he needed no one and answered to nothing and existed as a self-contained fact. So when his car pulled up on the evening of October the 18th and the valet opened the door and Lucien stepped out in his charcoal suit, looking the way he always looked, like a cold front, and then the second door opened, the murmur started before the woman was even fully out of the car. She wore the navy dress. It was 3 seasons old and simply cut, and it fit her about the way a borrowed dress fits, adequately. Her hair was down. Alara had taken it down in the car without a mirror by feel, and it sat slightly unevenly at her shoulders in a way that was either artless or calculated and was impossible to tell which. She wore no jewelry. She had found, in the bottom of the staff closet, a small navy clutch that matched nothing perfectly and so matched the dress by default. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Hargrove Hotel, and the cold air came off the harbor 2 blocks east, and she did not look at anyone. Lucien had not looked at her since she'd gotten into the car. He'd spent the ride reading something on his phone with the focused, performative concentration of a man who wants it understood that he has more important things to attend to. She had sat across from him in silence and watched the city pass the windows. Now he moved toward the entrance without waiting for her, and she followed 2 steps behind, and the small crowd of photographers on the steps, there was always a small crowd of photographers on the steps, got their shots and then stood slightly confused, reviewing their screens, trying to understand what they were looking at. The ballroom was already 3/4 full when they arrived. The chandelier cascade was doing its job. Lucien moved through the room the way he always did, with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows the crowd will part for him. And it did. And he accepted glasses and handshakes and the particular deferential attention that power generates in enclosed spaces. Alara stayed close, not attached to him, just proximate, close enough that there was no ambiguity about whose company she was in, far enough that she was clearly not a bodyguard and not a date in any conventional sense, and not quite a colleague either. The first person who spoke to her was not who she expected. He was 70, at least, with the kind of face that has been photographed so many times it has calcified into its public expression. Ambassador Gerald Fitch, retired technically, though people in his position never fully retired, had been the United States man in 4 different postings across 20 years, and had written 2 books about international governance that had been assigned in graduate seminars and ignored by most people who mattered and read closely by the ones who did. He walked directly toward Alara with the focus of a man who has learned to move through rooms efficiently, leaving Lucian midway through a handshake with the state assemblyman. "You were at the Lisbon Forum," Fitch said. Not a greeting, a statement. The kind that implies, "I know something and I'm waiting to see if you'll confirm it." Alara looked at him. "That's quite specific." 12 years ago, the panel on reparative diplomacy. There was a young woman, maybe 17, 18, who asked a question about transitional justice mechanisms that the moderator brushed off and shouldn't have. I've thought about that question periodically since. A small pause. The chandelier light moved across the space between them. "It was a good question," Alara said. "It was a better question than most of what was said from the podium." He tilted his head slightly. "Are you going to tell me your name?" "Alara Vale." Something crossed his face, not recognition exactly, but the shadow of it. The way a word sounds, almost like another word. "You work for Moretti?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with the expressionless focus of a man who has spent decades reading rooms and people. Then, "What do you think of the current situation in the Baltic?" And she told him, precisely, fluently, without hesitation, referencing 3 specific diplomatic incidents from the previous 8 months, in a way that indicated not just general awareness, but the kind of granular, ongoing attention that came from either professional necessity or something close to obsession. Fitch listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, "Who taught you?" "Does it matter?" "Not especially." He almost smiled. "Excuse me a moment." She watched him cross the room toward a cluster of people near the East Bar. He said something to 2 of them, a woman in emerald green who was the CEO of a shipping conglomerate, and a man whose face appeared on the cover of financial magazines. And both of them turned and looked toward Alara with expressions that contained something she recognized as recalibration. Bombed. Lucian noticed 20 minutes later. He was midway through a conversation with Vincent Caro, who ran half the Port Authority's informal side economy and owed Lucian a specific and long-standing debt, when he became aware of a shift in the room's social gravity. The kind of shift that happens when a conversation has become so interesting to its participants that nearby conversations begin to orbit it. He turned. Alara was standing near the far end of the room by the windows that overlooked the harbor. She was speaking to 4 people who had, at various points throughout the Gala season, declined to be photographed anywhere near Lucian Moretti. Ambassador Fitch was there, the shipping CEO. A man named Hal Brenner, who had run 2 Senate campaigns and reportedly knew where several specific bodies were buried in both the literal and political senses, and a woman in her 50s whose name Lucian couldn't immediately place, but whose face he associated with significant federal influence. They were not being polite to her. They were listening to her. There was a difference that Lucian, who had spent his entire adult life learning to read rooms, understood immediately. Carmen's daughter Rosie, who sometimes worked events at the Hargrove as a favor to the catering company, passed Lucian with a tray of champagne flutes and said, without looking at him, "She's been at it for 40 minutes, 3 different groups." Lucian took a glass. "What is she saying?" "Don't know. I can't hear from where I'm working." But Mr. Fitch laughed twice. "And I've worked 18 of these, and I've never seen that man laugh." Lucian drank the champagne without tasting it. Across the room, Alara Vale said something that made Hal Brenner put his hand on his knee and lean forward like a man who has just been told something he needed to know 20 years ago and is very glad to finally have it. What? The moment that closed the first phase of the evening came at 11:15, when the gala's host, a philanthropist named Douglas Hargrove III, who was the 3rd Douglas Hargrove in a row to host this event and had the particular social ease of a man whose confidence has never been tested in any meaningful way, made a short speech about the evening's charitable focus, and then, in closing, acknowledged several guests who had made notable contributions. He named Lucian Moretti, And then he paused, in the way that hosts pause when they are deciding whether to say the next thing, and said, "And I think most of you have already discovered our most unexpectedly engaging guest this evening. I don't do this often, but I'd like to invite the conversation that has apparently been captivating this room for the last hour to continue on a slightly larger stage. Miss," he looked toward the cluster by the windows, "would you be willing to share whatever you've been telling Gerald Fitch that has him looking like that?" A few laughs. Fitch raised his glass slightly in the direction of Hargrove, which was as close to confirmation as he ever got. The room turned. Lucien turned with it. Alara stood very still by the window for a moment. The harbor lights were behind her. The chandelier light found her in the way that light finds things when a room is paying attention. She said, "No," a beat of surprised silence. "These are conversations that deserve smaller rooms," she said. "Not apologetic, not rude, simply certain. But I'm happy to continue them individually, if anyone's interested." 3 people immediately stepped toward her. Lucien stood in the center of the ballroom, holding a champagne glass he'd forgotten to put down. And around him the room moved with a new kind of energy, and for the first time in 7 years at the Hargrove Gala, he was not the gravitational center. He was just a man in a charcoal suit watching a woman in a borrowed navy dress decline to perform for an audience, and in doing so, command one. His jaw tightened. He set down his glass. The thing that happened next was not part of his plan. He moved toward her, and the group around her shifted in the subtle social way that bodies shift to either include or exclude, and Alara looked at him as he approached with the same steady, flat attention she gave everything, like a camera that neither judges nor flinches. "We should go," he said, low, not asking. In a moment. The certainty of it stopped him, not the words, the delivery. The complete absence of the anxiety he was accustomed to generating in people. He had spent decades refining the particular pressure of his presence, and this woman stood in it like she was standing in ordinary air. "Now," he said. And she looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time all evening, and said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "You brought me here to be laughed at. They aren't laughing. You should think carefully about what that means before you decide to make a scene." The blood moved somewhere strange in his chest. Not anger exactly. Something more uncomfortable than anger. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, 4, 5. She didn't look away. He stepped back. 10 minutes, he said. She nodded once and turned back to the group. Lucien walked to the bar and stood with his back to the room and his hands flat on the zinc surface and breathed in the way that men breathe when they are trying to locate their certainty and finding it less solid than they remembered. Behind him, the room continued its new orbit. And somewhere in the middle of it, the woman he'd brought to humiliate was speaking quietly to people who ran half the legitimate architecture of the Eastern Seaboard, and they were writing things on the backs of business cards and pressing those cards into her hands, and she was accepting them without excitement or surprise, like a person receiving things they were owed rather than things they'd been given. The bartender refilled Lucien's glass without being asked. "Quite a woman," the bartender said, because bartenders at galas are the only people permitted to say obvious things. Lucien did not respond. He picked up his glass and turned back to face the room, and the chandelier light caught the crystals above in its cascade pattern, and the whole room glittered like something about to break. And across the space, through 100 people and 10 years of a carefully constructed self-conception, Alara Vale looked up and met his eyes for exactly 1 second, and then looked away again. Back to the people around her, as if he were simply one more feature of a room she was navigating with perfect, unhurried ease. He had expected, tonight, to feel powerful. What he felt instead was something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him the rest of the evening to identify it. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something very large that he did not yet understand. And then, just before midnight, as the evening was settling into its final hour, and Lucien was preparing to collect her and leave and spend the drive home reconstructing his authority in his own head, a man appeared at the main doors, wide, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that was expensive but wrong in a way that only someone who knew the difference would notice. He had 3 men with him, positioned with the casual precision of people who know where they are in a room and why. His name was Frank Tesaro, and Frank Tesaro looked across the ballroom, past Lucian, past the assembled governors and CEOs and former ambassadors, and found Alara Vale immediately, like a man who had been looking for something specific and had just confirmed it was exactly where he expected. The expression on his face was not hostile. It was something worse: recognition, old and settled and carrying years of weight behind it. Alara felt the shift in the room before she saw the cause. Her spine straightened by a degree. Her hands, which had been relaxed, went still. She turned. She saw Frank Tesaro. The color did not drain from her face. Her expression did not crack. But something happened in her eyes, a rapid, comprehensive calculation, the kind that precedes not panic, but decision. And then she looked at Lucien Moretti across the room with an urgency that was the first uncontrolled thing she had shown all night. The message was clear. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And before either of them could move, Frank Tesaro raised his glass across the ballroom in a slow, deliberate toast. Not to Lucien, not to the room, but directly, unmistakably, to her. Frank Tesaro didn't move from the doorway right away. That was the thing about men like him. They understood the value of stillness. He stood with his glass raised and his eyes on Alara and let the moment do its work. Let the discomfort of his presence spread through the room the way cold spreads through a house when a window is left open in winter. Slow, certain, impossible to stop once it had started. Lucien crossed the room in 14 steps. He knew because he counted them, the way he counted things when his mind was working faster than his face was willing to show. He reached Alara's side and didn't touch her and didn't look at her. He looked at Tesaro. "Frank," he said. "Lucien." Tesaro finally lowered his glass. He walked forward now, unhurried, his 3 men spreading in a loose arc behind him with the practiced invisibility of people whose job is to be invisible until they aren't. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd been having a quiet season." "I'm having the season I'm having." "Sure." Tessero's eyes moved to Alara. They stayed there. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" A half-second pause, the kind that in most rooms would pass unnoticed and in this room did not. "Alara Vale," Lucien said. "She works for me." "Does she?" Not a question. Tesaro extended his hand to her, palm up, like a man who expected things to be placed in it. "Frank Tesaro. I run operations south of the Meridian Bridge, among other things. And you are—" "She told you," Alara said. Her voice was even. Her hand, when she shook his, was steady. "Alara Vale." "Right." Tesaro held her hand a beat too long. "Funny thing, names. How some of them stick to people and some of them don't quite fit right. You know? Like a coat that's almost the right size." Alara withdrew her hand. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Of course not." He smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind built for an audience. His eyes were doing something entirely different from his mouth. "Enjoy your evening." He moved away toward the bar, his men adjusting to follow with the smooth collective motion of a school of fish turning. Lucien waited until Tesaro was fully absorbed into the crowd before turning to look at Alara directly for the first time since she'd told him to think carefully about making a scene. "What was that?" he said. Not a question either. A man introducing himself. "Don't." Her jaw tightened, just slightly. The first crack in the surface. "This isn't the place." "You're right. It's not." He picked up 2 glasses from a passing tray without looking at the tray and held one out to her. "But we're going to have a conversation tonight that is not in this room, and you're going to tell me exactly who Frank Tesaro is to you and why looking at him turned you into a different person for 3 seconds. She took the glass. "I didn't become a different person." "Your hands went still." She looked at him. "People move their hands constantly," he said, "even when they're trying not to. You move yours. Small things, the way you hold a glass, the way you angle your fingers when you're talking. For 3 seconds when you saw him, nothing moved. That's not calm. That's control. Those are different things, and I know the difference." The harbor lights were still in the windows behind her. Her face gave him nothing. "Later," she said. "Tonight." "Yes," she said. "Tonight." The next hour was a performance, and they both knew it, and neither of them acknowledged it, and so they performed. Lucien worked the room the way he always worked rooms, with the patient authority of a man who understands that social capital accrues in small denominations and must be collected consistently. He spoke to the right people for the right length of time, and said nothing he didn't intend to say, and listened for the things beneath the things people said out loud, which was where the actual information always lived. But his attention was divided, and divided attention in a room like this was a liability he couldn't afford, and he knew it, and it made him colder than usual, which made the people he spoke to slightly more careful than usual, which was its own kind of useful. Elara moved through the same room on a parallel track that never intersected his, and he watched her from across distances while appearing not to watch her, and what he saw was this. She was working too. Not the way she'd worked the first 2 hours, that had been organic, unself-conscious, the natural movement of a person in their element. This was different. She was covering ground deliberately, returning to people she'd already spoken with, reinforcing connections, saying things that made people nod in a particular way. The nod of people who are agreeing to something, not just acknowledging something. She was tightening a net, and she was doing it efficiently and without appearing to do it at all. And Lucien Moretti, who had been building and tightening nets his entire adult life, recognized the motion the way you recognize your native language spoken in a foreign country. This woman was not a housemaid who happened to know things. This woman was operating. The question, the one that sat under his sternum like something swallowed wrong, was for whom? Frank Tesaro found Lucien at 1:45 near the east windows where the harbor view was best and the crowd was thinnest. He came alone this time, which was either a courtesy or a statement that he didn't need his men for this conversation. And with Frank Tesaro, it was always both simultaneously. "She's something," Tesaro said, positioning himself beside Lucien so they were both looking out at the harbor. The "we're just two men admiring the view" posture. Lucien had used it himself 100 times. "Where'd you find her?" "Employment agency." "Sure." Tesaro turned his glass slowly. "You know what she did tonight? In the 2 hours since I've been here? She spoke to Fitch, obviously. That was already done when I arrived. But she also had a 15-minute conversation with Patricia Souls. You know who Patricia Souls is?" "Deputy Director of the Office of Foreign Asset Control," Lucien said. "Retired. Allegedly retired. And before Patricia, she spent 10 minutes with David Chung, who is allegedly just a shipping consultant, but who we both know is something considerably more specific than that." Tesaro paused. "And about 40 minutes ago, she had a very brief exchange, maybe 90 seconds, not long, with a man I didn't immediately recognize. Had someone run him. His name is Orrin Marsh, low profile. He is apparently a liaison attached to the State Department's quiet office, which doesn't technically exist, and therefore doesn't have a name." Lucien's glass was in his hand, and he was careful not to hold it any differently than he had been. "You've had people running names for an hour," he said. "I'm a thorough man." "What are you saying, Frank?" Tesaro turned to look at him directly. The Harbor View performance was over. "I'm saying you walked in tonight with a woman who has spent the last 2 hours quietly and efficiently establishing contact with people who operate in spaces that are very far outside the social register of a household employee. I'm saying I looked at her face when she saw me, and I know what I saw, and what I saw was not a maid who recognized a stranger." He paused. "I'm saying you might not know who you're sleeping with." "I'm not sleeping with her." "Lucien," Tesaro's voice dropped a half register, "I'm giving you information as a professional courtesy. What you do with it is your business. But if that woman is something other than what she's presented herself to be, then you have a problem that goes significantly beyond whatever game you thought you were running tonight." He moved away before Lucien could respond, back into the crowd, smooth as oil on water. Lucien stood at the east window and looked at the harbor for a long moment. The lights on the water, the cold coming through the glass. Then he turned and found Elara across the room. She was saying goodbye to Ambassador Fitch, shaking his hand. Fitch held her hand in both of his. The two-hand hold, The one people use when they want to indicate that what just happened mattered to them, and said something to her that she listened to with her head slightly bowed and then straightened and nodded once, and Fitch released her hand and walked away, and she stood for a moment alone, her back 3/4 to Lucien, her face in profile. She was not looking at Tesoro, but she knew where he was. Lucien could tell by the precise angle of her not looking, the too perfect orientation away from the part of the room where Tesoro currently stood. The way you don't look at something you're tracking. He crossed the room. "We're leaving," he said. This time, she didn't negotiate. She set her glass down on the nearest surface and followed him to the coat check and stood beside him in silence while their things were retrieved, and did not speak in the elevator, and did not speak in the lobby, and did not speak on the steps outside where the cold air hit them both, and her breath came out white in the November dark. The car came around. His driver, Anton, who had been with him 9 years and had the discretion of a man who understood that longevity in his profession required a selective memory. They got in. The car moved. The city passed outside. Lit windows, wet streets, the orange smear of streetlights on pavement. Inside, the silence had a texture to it, dense and specific, the kind that accumulates between people who both have things to say and are deciding in what order to say them. Lucien spoke first. "Frank Tesoro knew you." "I don't know Frank Tesoro. That's not what I said." A pause. The tires on wet asphalt. Someone's horn 2 streets over. "He recognized me," she said. "That's different from knowing me." "From where?" "Nothing." "Elara, I need you to understand something before I answer that," she said. Her voice had changed. Not softer, stripped down. The careful social register she'd maintained all evening was gone, and what was underneath it was quieter and harder and more real. "Whatever I tell you in this car, it doesn't go anywhere. Not to Marcus, not to anyone in your operation, not to Tesoro. If I'm going to tell you this, it has to be contained." The audacity of it. A woman in a borrowed dress who slept in a room next to a water heater in his house, setting conditions on a conversation in his car, should have made him angry. It didn't. It made him careful. "Contained," he repeated. "Yes. You're in my car, going to my house, having just spent 2 hours at my expense, at an event I brought you to. And you're setting conditions." "Yes." He looked at her profile in the passing light. The street lamp strobed across her face at intervals, illuminating and withdrawing, illuminating and withdrawing. "Talk," he said. She didn't speak immediately. She turned to look out the window for a moment, and he watched the muscle in her jaw move once, and then she turned back and looked at him directly. "I grew up in a specific world," she said. "Not your world. A different one. Diplomatic circles. International policy. I spent my childhood in rooms where what was said mattered less than what was understood, and I learned very early how to understand things." She paused. "My father was a significant figure in that world for a long time." "Was?" "He died when I was 22. She said it the way you say things that happened a long time ago and have been recited enough times to lose their raw edge, the recitation, not the wound. The circumstances around his death were, there were people who had reasons to want his work buried, not just his papers or his files, his whole record, his legacy, the things he'd built over 30 years. She looked at her hands in her lap. "Me, as an extension of that." "Who were they?" "People in various governments, people adjacent to governments. Some of them were your kind of people. Some of them were the kind of people your kind of people avoid." Lucien said nothing. "I didn't die," she said. "Obviously. But I made a considered decision to become difficult to find. New name, new city, new work. I took the least visible employment I could locate in each place I landed, and I moved regularly, and I was careful." A small pause. "I had been careful for 6 years before I came to work for you. And Tesoro." Her breath came out slowly. "Frank Tesoro was involved in the network of people who made my father's death possible. Not directly. He is, a conduit, a financial layer." He doesn't get his hands into things personally. He makes the money move in ways that allow other people to get their hands into things. She turned back to the window. He doesn't know my face. He knew my father's face. I have features that resemble my father's features enough that someone who knew him well and was looking for the resemblance might find it. Was he looking? He was looking the moment he walked in and saw me on your arm. She said it flatly. He's been looking for a long time. He doesn't know specifically who I am or what name I use. But he knows someone that fits my general profile has been living quietly somewhere in the northeastern corridor for the last 6 years, and he knows that finding that person matters to certain people who matter to him. The car slowed for a light. The red bled through the rain-wet windshield. So coming to that gala tonight, Lucien said slowly, was a significant risk, she said. Yes, I knew that when Marcus told me. I made a calculation. What calculation? She looked at him. That being in a room full of people who remembered my father's world was more useful to me than staying invisible. That if Tessaro was going to find me eventually regardless, being found in a room where I had relationships and he was outnumbered was better than being found somewhere else. She paused. And that whatever you intended tonight, your presence was a form of protection I don't usually have access to. The light changed. The car moved. Lucien sat with it, all of it, the shape of what she'd just told him assembling itself in his mind with the cold mechanical efficiency he applied to any new piece of intelligence. She had not come to that gala as his prop. She had used his invitation as cover. She had walked into a dangerous room deliberately, using his arm as the armor she needed, and she had spent the evening building exactly the network of contacts that would make her safer from the people hunting her. The woman he'd brought to be humiliated had spent the entire evening advancing her own survival. He should have been furious. He was something else entirely, and it took him the length of 3 city blocks to identify what it was. He was impressed. They reached the estate at 12:40. Anton killed the engine. Neither of them moved immediately. Tessaro is going to move on this, Lucien, and said, whatever he's decided you are, he's decided it tonight. He'll make calls tomorrow morning. I know. That means you have a problem. I've had this problem for 6 years. You had a manageable version of it for 6 years. He turned to look at her squarely. In the low light of the idling car, she looked exactly like what she was. A person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and was used to carrying it, but was also, at this specific moment, tired. Tonight you made it acute. I'm aware. So what happens now? She looked at him. And for the first time all evening, for the first time in 11 months, in fact, the careful blankness dropped entirely, and he saw underneath it something complicated and very human. Not fear, but the thing adjacent to fear that lives in people who have learned not to indulge fear. The decision fatigue of someone who has been making survival calculations for so long, they do it the way other people breathe. I don't know, she said. And then, quieter, I was hoping you might. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the car door, and the cold night air came in, and he stepped out and stood on the gravel drive and said, without turning around, come inside. She followed him up the front steps and through the heavy front door, and Marcus appeared from the side hallway in the way that Marcus always appeared, slightly rumpled, slightly anxious, carrying the expression of a man who had been waiting up and was not entirely sure he'd wanted to be awake for whatever was about to happen. Sir, Marcus said, then seeing Alara behind him, is everything— Get me everything we have on Frank Tessaro, Lucien said. Everything. Financial records, associates, current operations, whatever Reeves compiled when we were doing the Meridian assessment, pull that too. He was already moving toward his office. And get Demi on the phone, tonight. It's almost 1 a.m. Get her on the phone! Marcus disappeared. Lucien stopped in the hallway, his hand on the office door, and turned back. Alara was standing in the entrance hall, still in the navy dress, the small clutch in her hand, her hair slightly loosened from the night. The house was quiet around her. The marble floor she'd been scrubbing 24 hours ago gleamed under the hallway lights. Whatever name you use, he said, it's about to stop being enough. She met his eyes. I know, she said. He opened the office door. And then, From the inside pocket of his suit jacket, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the screen. Something shifted in his face. Not much. A degree of tightening around the eyes, the specific compression of a man receiving information that confirms a threat he'd estimated but had hoped to have more time to prepare for. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a photograph, taken tonight, in the ballroom of the Hargrove Hotel. Alara and Ambassador Fitch, mid-conversation, the harbor lights visible through the window behind them. Clear enough to have been taken with professional equipment from a deliberate angle. Below the photograph, a single line of text, sent from a number his system had already flagged as unregistered and unregisterable. We know who she is. You have 48 hours to hand her over, or we discuss terms in a different kind of room. Alara looked at the screen for a long time. When she looked up, her face had gone very still. Not the controlled stillness of the ballroom, not the careful professional blankness she'd maintained for 11 months in his house. Something older than that. The stillness of a person standing at the edge of something that has been approaching for years and has... Alara looked at the screen for a long time. Then she looked up at Lucian and said, "When did you hire Marcus?" The question landed wrong, sideways, in the wrong register entirely for what was happening, and Lucien felt it the way you feel a step that isn't where you expected it to be in the dark. "What? Marcus, when did you bring him on?" 7 years ago. Why? How did you find him? Lucian stared at her. He came through a staffing referral. Reeves vetted him. Alara, we have 48 hours and a threat from people who took that photograph. She pointed at his phone. Not at the image. At the metadata line in the corner of the screen. A timestamp and a 3-digit location tag that she'd apparently read and processed in the 2 seconds she'd looked at the screen. That timestamp is 11:42. We arrived at the Gala at 9:30. The angle on that photograph is from the service corridor that runs behind the east window. I know because I spent 40 minutes standing at that window, and I noted the access points in the room when we walked in. She paused. The service corridor at the Hargrove is staff-only access. It requires either a hotel keycard or prior knowledge of the building layout. The stillness that moved through Lucian's chest was the specific stillness of a man who has realized he is behind someone else's timeline. Marcus handled the event logistics, he said. Yes. He booked the car, confirmed the table, and would have had access to the venue's service layout as part of the booking process. Lucian's jaw tightened. He looked at his phone, then at the hallway where Marcus had disappeared 3 minutes ago. Stay here, he said. Lucien. Stay here. He found Marcus in the study, already on the phone, his back to the door, his voice low and rapid in the way that voices get when they are trying to finish a conversation before being interrupted. Lucien closed the door behind him. Marcus turned, saw his face. Ended the call in the middle of a sentence. The study was a room Lucien used for things that didn't need witnesses. Dark wood, no windows, a single desk lamp that threw a narrow yellow cone across the surface and left the rest of the room in gradations of shadow. Marcus stood in that shadow with his phone in his hand and his glasses slightly askew and the expression of a man watching something arrive that he had hoped would come much later, or not at all. Who were you calling? Lucian said. Demi, you told me. You weren't calling Demi. Marcus said nothing. You were on the phone for 2 minutes before I came in. I listened at the door for 45 seconds. Your voice, the register you use when you're managing someone, not reporting to someone, managing them. You use a different voice when you're reporting up. Lucian moved into the room slowly, not toward Marcus, just deeper into the space, the way you move when you want someone to feel the room shrink. So let's try again. Who are you calling? Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. You should sit down, he said. His voice had changed. Something underneath the administrative efficiency of it. Something that had been there for 7 years and that Lucian now understood he had never seen because he had never looked. I need to explain something to you. You need to explain a lot of things to me. Yes. Marcus set the phone down on the desk very carefully, the deliberate motion of a man putting down the only weapon he had. I do, and I'm going to. Because I think I think it has gone far enough now that there's no version of tonight that ends well if you don't understand the full picture. Lucian stopped moving. Then explain it, he said. Marcus took his glasses off, polished them with the hem of his jacket, the small, habitual gesture Lucian had watched him perform 10,000 times over 7 years, put them back on, and looked at Lucian with the eyes of a man who is about to lose something he's known all along he was going to lose. The photograph wasn't meant as a threat, Marcus said. It was meant as a signal. The message, the 48 hours, the language about terms, that wasn't written by Tesaro's people. I wrote it. I sent it from a clean number because I needed you to take it seriously fast, and I knew a vague warning wouldn't work with you. It had to look like a threat. The room was very quiet. The photograph was taken by one of the hotel staff I coordinated with. I asked for it because I needed confirmation that she had made contact with Fitch and the others before I could move to the next stage. Marcus's voice was steady in the terrible way that voices go steady when someone has made peace with what they're saying. I have been trying to locate Eleanor Voss for 4 years. I was retained to find her. I found her 11 months ago in Baltimore, and I arranged for the Moretti household to be recommended to the employment agency she used because I needed to put her somewhere I could watch her. The name hit the room like something physical. Eleanor Voss. Lucien's voice, when it came, was very quiet. Say that again. Eleanor Voss. That's her name, her real name. Her father was Ambassador Harlan Voss. You may not recognize that name, but people in certain circles recognize it considerably. He was the architect of what became the Meridian Accord, a set of informal agreements between 3 governments and 2 private financial networks that controlled a significant portion of transatlantic asset movement for nearly a decade. When Harlan Voss died, the accord should have dissolved. It didn't, because certain key documents that would have exposed every party's involvement were never recovered. He paused. Eleanor was her father's primary confidant in the last 2 years of his life. There is a strong operational belief that she knows where those documents are, or that she is, herself, the document, that she carries the key information in her memory in a form that could reconstruct the Accord's full liability exposure. Lucian stood very still. Who retained you? He said. A small pause. Several parties, through intermediaries. It's not a clean single line. Who retained you? Marcus looked at the desk. The primary contracting interest connects back to the de Cortez organization. And there it was, the bottom of it. The de Cortez family who had been sending messages about territory, who had been making noise about Lucian's legitimacy for months, who had sent what he'd understood as political pressure, but which he now understood with the cold clarity of a man seeing an image come into focus, was something else entirely. Not pressure about territory, a full operation. They had placed an asset inside his house a year ago. They had been running an intelligence mission within his walls while pretending to conduct a turf dispute outside them. And they had used him. Used the fact that he was stupid enough to bring her to a public event, to expose her and make their confirmation. And tonight, Lucian said, tonight confirmed her identity beyond operational doubt. The contacts she made, Fitch, Souls, Marsh, those names will be in my report. The de Cortez people now know she is active, that she has reestablished her network, and that waiting longer increases risk. Marcus picked up his glasses again, put them down without polishing them this time. They will move to acquire her before she can use those connections to protect herself. Acquire, Lucian said. Marcus said nothing. You mean kill her? That's been the standing order for 4 years. Bad. Lucian opened the study door. Alar was in the hallway 3 feet away. She had not stayed in the entrance hall. She had followed him in the silent, exact way of someone who has spent years reading spaces, and she had heard enough. He could tell by her face when he opened the door and found her there, the specific compression around her eyes of a person receiving confirmation of a thing they have suspected without having the words for. She looked past him at Marcus. Marcus looked back at her. Something passed between them in the silence that Lucian couldn't fully read, a long, complicated acknowledgement that had the weight of a conversation conducted across years and through intermediaries, the recognition of 2 people who have been circling the same information from different sides. You're better than I expected, she said to Marcus. I didn't make you for 11 months. You were very careful, Marcus said. Not careful enough. No. He looked genuinely tired now. The performance was completely gone. Not quite. She turned to Lucien. Is there a way out of the estate that Tesaro's people won't be watching? The east access road, through the groundskeeper's gate. Can we use it in the next 20 minutes? We. She looked at him with an expression that was not patience and not impatience, but something more pressurized than either. The de Cortez operation knows I'm here. They know I've reactivated my network. They will not wait the 48 hours in that message because that message was a control device, not a genuine timeline, and whatever Marcus told them tonight changes the calculation entirely. She paused. They will also know that you now know, which means you are no longer a useful container. You are a loose end. So, yes, we. Lucien looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded very slightly, confirming. Get your coat, Lucien said. They were in the east corridor moving toward the groundskeeper's exit when Lucien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Reeves, his primary intelligence operative, the man who handled the messy empirical work of knowing things. He answered, Talk. 3 vehicles on the north perimeter. Came up on the exterior cameras 4 minutes ago. Parked dark, no plates. Reeves's voice had the flat operational calm of a man who has been in bad situations enough times to stop narrating them emotionally. 2 more on the south approach, staged at the intersection. That's a containment formation, not surveillance. They're not watching, they're boxing. Lucien's jaw set. How long before they move? At current positioning, 20 minutes to coordinate. Maybe 15 if they have a go signal already. The east access road. A pause, keys clicking. I'm checking the cameras. Hold. Another pause. Longer. Clear. But only east. If they have the north and south covered, they may have assumed you'd use the main gate. East might be a gap, or it might be a funnel. Which do you think? I think if I were running this operation, I'd leave 1 gap on purpose and put 3 men at the end of it. Lucien said nothing. There is a third option, Reeves said carefully. The canal access under the east garden. The old drainage infrastructure. You'd have to go through the basement, through the maintenance tunnel to the pump house, and out through the canal gate. It's not a fast route, but it's not on any building schematic that would have been available to an outside operator. How do you know that? Because I checked 3 years ago when I was running a threat assessment on this property that I presented to you and that you said you'd read. Lucien had not read it. How long through this tunnel? He said. 12 minutes if you move. The canal gate opens onto the service road behind the waterfront development. There's a car park there, public. Cameras that point toward the water, not the road. Lucien looked at Alara. Maintenance tunnel, he said to her. Canal access. She didn't ask questions. She turned and moved toward the basement door. He told Reeves, have a car at the waterfront service road in 14 minutes. Clean plates. No one from the regular pool. And Marcus? Reeves asked. Lucien looked back down the corridor. Marcus was standing at the far end, still in his slightly rumpled jacket, his phone in his hand, his face in the shadow of the hallway light. Marcus stays, Lucien said. He ended the call. The basement was cold and smelled of stone and old water, the particular mineral cold of spaces that have never been warm. Lucien found a torch on the maintenance shelf by the stairs and led, and Alara followed close behind, and neither of them spoke for the first 90 seconds because the ceiling was low and the noise of their movement echoed off the walls, and talking felt like it would cost something they couldn't afford to spend. Then Alara said quietly behind him, How much did you hear before you went into the study? Enough. Eleanor Voss. You heard the name. Yes. A stretch of silence. The tunnel was concrete, old, the kind of infrastructure built to last and then forgotten. Water sounds somewhere to the left. The canal, close enough that the walls were damp in patches, and the torch found small black circles of moisture on the ceiling. Then you know I lied to you for 11 months, she said. You didn't lie. You didn't tell me anything. That's the same thing in your world. He thought about that. In my world, everyone is something they're not telling me. That's the baseline. The question is whether what they're not telling me is directed against me. He moved the torch around a low section of ceiling. Was it? A pause. No, she said. I believe you, he said. I shouldn't, but I do. They moved through a section where the ceiling dropped further and they had to crouch, single file, the sound of the canal louder now, and the cold more penetrating, and Lucien felt the specific quality of the cold that comes with exposure. Not just temperature, but the knowledge of being outside the perimeter of a thing that had protected him, however inadequately. The Moretti estate, 14 rooms. 4 he didn't enter, 1 that was hers. He'd built that world with a decade of specific and brutal work, and someone had been living inside it for 11 months, using it as cover for a mission that had nothing to do with him and his entire apparatus. Marcus, the vetting process, the careful structure of controlled information, had failed to detect it because he had never, not once, considered the possibility that the vulnerability would walk through his door wearing a housemaid's uniform and spend 11 months scrubbing his floors. The documents Marcus mentioned, he said, the Meridian Accord materials, do you have them? She was quiet for 3 steps. Not in the way they think, she said. What does that mean? It means my father didn't leave me files or physical evidence. He left me something harder to transfer and harder to destroy. Another pause. He spent the last 6 months of his life making sure I understood the entire structure of the Accord, every party, every mechanism, every point of leverage. He was very thorough. He knew what was coming, and he knew that paper could be burned. Her voice was flat and factual, the register of a person reciting a thing that has no feeling left on its surface, all the feeling having been handled long ago in private. I am the documentation. Everything I know is exactly as dangerous to the people involved as anything written down would have been. Lucien stopped walking, turned around in the narrow tunnel, the torch between them making their faces unreadable to each other. Then they don't just need to find you, he said. No. They need to make sure you never tell anyone what you know. That's been the operational objective for 4 years. He looked at her in the torchlight, the damp walls, the sound of water. The 14 minutes they'd been counting down since Reeves's call, now somewhere around 9. At the Gala tonight, he said slowly. Fitch, Souls, Marsh, the others. You weren't just re-establishing contacts. No. You were telling them what you know, distributing pieces of it. Enough pieces, she said, that killing me alone would no longer be sufficient to contain the information. He stared at her. She had walked into that room tonight, on his arm in a borrowed dress, placed there as a prop in someone else's performance, and she had used every minute of it to methodically destroy the operational logic of the people hunting her. She had scattered what she knew among people powerful enough that touching her now meant touching all of them. She had done it in 2 hours and 40 minutes, and she had done it with him standing 15 feet away thinking she was the most interesting person he'd ever failed to understand. You knew, he said. When Marcus told you about the Gala, you knew immediately what it was. I suspected, but you came anyway. I came because I needed exactly what that room contained, and I had no other way to get into it. She met his eyes. I'm sorry I used you. I am not sorry I did it. He held the torch between them and looked at her face and thought about what it took to build a person capable of carrying 6 years of that weight and walking into a hostile room and doing what she'd done, and then walking out on the arm of a man who'd brought her there to be humiliated and still maintaining the specific posture of someone who had not yet played their final hand. He thought about his own empire, the work it took, the things it had cost. He turned and kept moving toward the pump house. When we get to the car, he said, you're going to tell me every name in the Accord, every structure, every mechanism, every party. Why? Because they came into my house, he said. They put an asset in my house for 11 months and ran an operation inside my walls using my resources and my ignorance and my guest list. And they did it to get to you, which means they decided I was a convenient piece of furniture. The anger in his voice was very controlled and very cold. The specific temperature of anger in people who have learned that hot anger costs more than it accomplishes. I am not furniture. She was quiet for 2 steps. If you involve yourself in this, she said. You understand what it means. The de Cortez family, the parties in the Accord, this is not your usual terrain. I know. People with legitimate government protection, international financial architecture. I know what I'm saying. She was quiet again. The pump house door was ahead, a gray metal rectangle with a wheel handle, moisture on its surface, the sound of the canal loud now on the other side. All right, she said. He put his hand on the wheel handle. There's one more thing, Elara said behind him. Something in her voice made him turn. She was holding Marcus's phone, the one he'd left on the desk in the study. She had picked it up, apparently, in the moment after he'd opened the study door and before they'd started moving, and he had not seen her do it, which told him something about how she moved when she needed to not be observed. She turned the screen toward him. It showed a text chain. Marcus's outgoing messages, the most recent sent 11 minutes ago, after Lucien had told him to stay, after they had started moving toward the basement. The message read, "She's with him. Canal route most likely. East Waterfront Service Road, moving now." The recipient contact was labeled with 2 initials, R.V. Lucien looked at the initials. "Reeves," he said. "Reeves," she said. The car at the Waterfront Service Road, clean plates, no one from the regular pool, 14 minutes, now 4 minutes away. Reeves, who had known about the canal route because he had done the threat assessment 3 years ago. Reeves, who had just told Lucien that the East Road might be a funnel with 3 men at the end of it. Reeves, who was now sending a car to exactly the location Lucien had asked for, to collect 2 people whose precise location and route he had just been given. Lucien stood in the tunnel with the pump house door in front of him and the canal on the other side of it, and a car arriving in 4 minutes that he could no longer trust, and behind him 11 months of a house that had been compromised from the inside out, and in his hand a torch that was their only light in a concrete tunnel under the ground, and beside him a woman. Lucien turned off the torch. The darkness was total and immediate, the kind that has weight to it, and for 2 full seconds, neither of them moved or spoke, and the only sounds were the canal water on the other side of the pump house door and their own breathing and the distant structural groan of old concrete settling around them. Then Lucien said, very quietly, "How many exits did you map when we came in?" "The pump house door forward, the way we came back. There's a 3rd, maintenance hatch, ceiling, 40 feet behind us. I saw the outline when your torch hit it." "You saw it in passing, in the dark." "I look at ceilings," she said. "Not defensively, just factually. I've been looking at ceilings and exits for 6 years." He turned the torch back on, low angle, and they moved back through the tunnel fast and quiet, and she found the hatch in 35 seconds because she had seen it and filed it, and her memory worked the way she needed it to work, which was with the precision of a person for whom forgetting had never been a safe option. The hatch was old iron, rusted at the hinges, and it took both of them, her hands on the wheel lock, his shoulder against the panel, to move it, and it made a sound when it opened that was too loud in the tunnel's acoustics, and they both went still and listened and heard nothing change in the world above them. He went up first, concrete lip, iron rungs, cold air hitting his face as he came through into an overgrown service lane between the estate's east garden wall and the neighboring property's drainage infrastructure. No lights, no movement. The canal was 30 feet east, visible as a dark line between the low buildings. He reached back down and she took his hand and he pulled her up and she came through the hatch with the controlled movement of someone who has climbed through worse things. And they stood in the dark service lane and he let go of her hand and they both looked east and west without speaking, reading the dark. "Reeves will have the waterfront road covered within the next 2 minutes, Elara said. "I know." "The vehicles on the north and south approaches. How many men total, realistically?" "Reeves gave me the count, 8 to 12. But that was Reeves, so add 30%. 12 to 16. And Tesaro may have his own people separate from the de Cortez operation." "Yes." She was looking east, calculating. "Fitch," she said, what about him?" "He gave me a number tonight, personal cell. He said if the evening produced complications, I should use it." She paused. "He was giving me a signal. He suspected something might follow." "Fitch is one man." Fitch is one man who can make 4 phone calls in 20 minutes that would make moving against either of us significantly more complicated. Exposure is the only leverage we have. She turned to look at Lucian. Do you have your phone? He checked. No signal underground had drained it. 12% battery. She held out her hand. He gave it to her and watched her dial a number from memory, not from a contact, from her head, 11 digits without hesitation, and put it to her ear. It rang 4 times. Then, Fitch? It's me, she said. The complications arrived ahead of schedule. A pause on the other end. Then Fitch's voice, precise and awake, in the way that certain old men are always awake, regardless of the hour, carrying 70 years of situations that required clarity at inconvenient times. How bad? 12 to 16 men on the Moretti perimeter, at least 1 compromised internal asset, possibly 2. De Cortez primary with Tesoro adjacent. We are currently outside the property on foot. You're mobile, check. Yes. The waterfront road? Compromised. A brief silence. The sound of movement on his end. Not panicked, purposeful. There is a private car service I use. The company is called Carver Logistics. It's on the registered contact list I gave Patricia Souls 3 years ago. Call them directly. Use the name Whitmore. Tell them Harbor and Clement intersection. Tell them 10 minutes. They'll come. A pause. Eleanor. She went very still at the name. The things you told me tonight, Fitch said, I want you to know they're already where they need to be. You understand what I mean. Yes, she said. Her voice was even. Thank you, Gerald. She ended the call, looked at the phone, 8% battery now. Harbor and Clement, she said. 4 blocks, Lucian said. Through the market district, it's open ground. Yes. They looked at each other in the dark service lane. Stay close, he said. They moved through this market district at the pace of 2 people who are moving fast without running because running announces itself, and they could not afford announcement. The district was half lit at this hour. The fish market's loading area active with the early crews, cold light spilling from the open bay doors, men moving crates with the unhurried efficiency of people working a rhythm they've worked 1,000 times. The smell of salt water and ice and diesel. They went through it without looking at anyone, and no one looked at them. Lucien was 2 steps ahead and slightly left, watching the cross streets, and he felt the moment before he saw it. A change in the texture of the space, the specific quality of stillness that men generate when they are waiting and trying not to look like they're waiting. He touched Alara's arm. She stopped. He didn't point. He moved his eyes left to the corner of Harbor and the cross street that fed toward the north approach of the estate, where a parked van sat dark with its engine off and 2 men stood near it in the performing casualness posture of people who are absolutely there for a reason and absolutely hoping you don't notice. She saw them. They moved right into the narrow passage between 2 market buildings, and behind them one of the men said something low to the other, and Lucien heard the specific sound of a phone being raised. They've seen us, he said. How far to Clement? 1.5 blocks. Can we make it? We're going to find out. They came out of the passage onto a service road running parallel to Harbor and moved fast now, no longer managing appearances, and behind them Lucien heard footsteps accelerate, not running yet, but closing, and the sound of a car engine starting somewhere behind them in the dark. The Clement intersection was ahead, a streetlight, the wet pavement, an empty bus stop. Lucien's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at it while running. Carver Logistics, she said. They're 2 minutes out. We don't have 2 minutes. The car behind them. Its headlights came on now, flooding the service road, and Lucien squinted against it and Alara ran beside him, and the light caught them both fully and held them in its beam the way light holds things it has found and intends to keep. He looked for cover. The bus stop was nothing. The market buildings to the left were locked at this hour. Ahead, the intersection, the street light, the open ground. Then Alara said, The fish market, the loading bay. Go. It's a dead end. Go. He went because she said it with the certainty of a person who had already thought further than him, and he had, in approximately the last 40 minutes, developed a working trust in what that certainty meant. They cut left, back through the gap between the buildings, and came out into the fish market's loading area. The cold light, the men with crates, the smell of ice and salt. And Alara walked directly to the nearest worker, a broad man in rubber overalls with a clipboard, and said, "I need your loading dock foreman. Right now." The man stared at her, at Lucien behind her, at the navy dress, at the overall composition of two people who had just come out of an alley at speed. "Lady, right now," she said. Not loud, just absolute. The foreman was a woman, it turned out, 50, built like someone who'd spent 30 years doing physical work, and had decided opinions about people who wasted her time. She came out of the office door with a coffee cup and looked at them both and said, "What?" "I need your refrigerated truck," Alara said. "The one at Dock 4. I need it for 20 minutes, and I need the driver to take us to the Harbor and Clement intersection, and I will pay $3,000 in a wire transfer that will clear before you've had another cup of coffee." The foreman looked at Lucien. "Who are you?" "Does it matter?" Lucien said. "You look like trouble." "We're leaving trouble behind us," he said. "Not bringing it to you." She looked at them both for 3 seconds that had the density of much longer. Then she said, "Bernie." A driver appeared. Done. The refrigerated truck moved out of the loading bay with the slow, deliberate pace of legitimate freight, and the car that had been following them, a black sedan with no plates, idling at the service road entrance, sat and watched it go and did not follow because it was a freight truck leaving a fish market, and there was no reason to follow a freight truck leaving a fish market. Alara sat on a crate of packed ice in the back of the truck, in the navy dress with her arms crossed against the cold, and her jaw set, and her breath coming white in the refrigerated air, and Lucien sat across from her on another crate, and neither of them spoke for the first minute because they were both breathing hard from the run, and there was nothing to say, yet that was worth spending breath on. The cold was serious, the kind that gets into your hands first and then works inward. "You're cold," he said. "Yes." He took off his jacket and held it out. She looked at it for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read, something in the vicinity of a person recalibrating a thing they'd thought they understood, and then she took it. "Harbor and Clement in 3 minutes," Alara said. "Fitch's car will be there. After that we stop running," Lucien said. She looked at him. "We've been reactive since the study," he said. "Reactive since the tunnel, since the service lane. We keep moving away from things instead of toward anything." His voice had the cold, flat quality of a man thinking out loud who does not want to be interrupted. "That changes now. We have 12 to 16 men on the perimeter of your estate. My estate is a building. I have other resources." Reeves is compromised. Reeves is one of 8 people who report to me operationally. He's been one of 8 for 3 years, and the other 7 don't know each other and don't share information channels because I built it that way specifically so that one compromised node doesn't collapse the whole structure. He looked at her. "I was not unprepared for betrayal in general. I was unprepared for the specific form it took tonight." She was quiet. The truck swayed slightly over a bad section of road. "What are you proposing?" she said. "Tesaro is the operational connector. He's the link between De Cortez and whatever government-adjacent people have been running the Accord interest for the last 4 years. Without him, the operation loses its coordination layer." He paused. "And Tesaro is a man who thinks he is currently in a position of significant advantage, which means he is in a place right now, tonight, celebrating that advantage in the way that men celebrate advantages." "His city office," Alara said slowly. "He has a standing arrangement. Late nights after a successful operation, he takes a meeting at his office in the Carver building with his 2 senior lieutenants. It's habitual and it's known, and it's the kind of habit that a man develops when he has never seriously believed someone would come for him directly." "You know this how?" "Because I was going to come for him directly 8 months ago for an entirely unrelated reason, and I did the research, and then the circumstance changed." He looked at her steadily. "The circumstance has now changed back." The truck slowed. The Clement intersection. "If we move on Tesaro," Alara said carefully, "we need more than disruption. We need him to talk. Specifically about the Accord parties, the ones still in government positions, the ones with ongoing exposure. Those are the names that matter. What makes you think he'll talk? Because I can give him something no one else can. She handed his jacket back to him. The truck stopped. I can give him a way out of the Accord liability entirely. I'm the only person who can do that. And he knows it. The back door of the truck opened from the outside. The driver, Bernie, who had not asked a single question the entire route, and who Lucien had decided deserved significantly more than the $3,000 Alara had promised. Outside, a gray sedan idled at the curb. Clean, nondescript. The driver's window came down, and the driver looked at Alara with the careful recognition of someone following specific instructions. "Whitmore," he said. "Yes," she said. They got in. The Carver Building was a glass and steel tower on the financial district's eastern edge, 42 floors, the bottom 12 occupied by legitimate financial service firms, and the upper 30 occupied by the kind of businesses that didn't need to advertise. Tesaro's office was on 31. Lucien knew the building's security layout because he knew the layouts of all the buildings that mattered in the city, the same way Alara knew ceilings and exits, because not knowing was a choice that could get you killed. The Carver car dropped them at the building's service entrance at 2:47 in the morning. Lucien made 2 phone calls from the car. The first lasted 90 seconds. The second lasted 4 minutes and involved him saying very little and listening very intently, and then saying 3 specific things in a specific order that he had clearly thought out before dialing. He put the phone away, 4% battery. "What did you do?" Alara said. "I told the remaining 7 people in my operational structure exactly what I know about the Accord, the de Cortez connection, and the asset placement in my house. All 7 simultaneously, separately encrypted channels." He looked at her. "You distributed your knowledge tonight at the Gala. I just distributed mine." She looked at him for a moment. Then something moved through her expression that was not quite a smile but was in the structural family of one, the specific loosening of a person who has been holding something alone for a very long time and has unexpectedly found that they are no longer holding it alone. "Okay," she said. The service entrance required a code that Lucien had obtained from research conducted 8 months ago and which had either been changed since or hadn't. And when he punched it in the panel, held for 2 full seconds that felt much longer, and then the lock disengaged. It hadn't been changed. Men like Tesaro, who had never seriously believed someone would come for them directly, also tended not to change their access codes. The service elevator to 31. The corridor, gray carpet, recessed lighting turned to its overnight minimum, the particular quiet of a building that is occupied but not publicly. Tesaro's suite was at the corridor's end, double doors, the light under them visible from 40 feet away. He was there. Lucien stopped 10 feet from the doors and turned to Alara. 3 men inside, minimum, he said. Tesaro and his 2 lieutenants. There may be additional security. I have no current count. I know. What you said in the truck about giving him a way out, is that real or is it leverage? She met his eyes. Both. That's what makes it work. He nodded. One more thing, he said. He held her gaze for a moment in the dim corridor light. Whatever happens in that room, you're not staff. You're not a prop. You're not anything I brought. You're here because you chose to be here. It was a small thing. It was also not a small thing. She understood from the way it landed in her chest. Not soft, not sentimental, just weight. The specific weight of being seen accurately. That he meant exactly what he'd said and nothing beyond it. I know, she said. He opened the doors. Tesaro was at his desk. Jacket off, sleeves rolled, the specific dishabille of a man who has won something tonight and is comfortable enough to show his comfort. His 2 lieutenants, one by the window, one near the bar, turned when the doors opened with the synchronized alertness of men whose job was to react to exactly this kind of thing. A 4th man, seated in the corner whom Lucien had not anticipated, rose immediately and his right hand moved. Don't, Lucien said. Just the word. Flat and without emphasis, the way you say things to people when you need them to understand that the emphasis is beside the point. The man stopped, looked at Tesaro. Tesaro sat back in his chair and looked at Lucien and then at Alara behind him, and his expression moved through several things in rapid sequence. Surprise, recalculation, a brief involuntary flash of something that might have been alarm, and then the settling of it all back into the careful surface of a man who deals in information and has therefore learned never to let information he didn't have show on his face. "Lucien," he said, "this is unexpected." "Sit down, Frank." "I am sitting." "Your men, sit them down." A pause. Tesoro looked at them all, made a small gesture. They sat. The window man in his chair, the barman on the couch arm, the corner man back in his corner. The tension in the room redistributed but didn't leave. "You want a drink?" Tesoro said. "I want you to look at her," Lucien said. "Really look. Not the way you looked at her tonight across a ballroom when you were deciding what she was worth to the people who are paying you. Look at her the way you look at something that is about to completely change your situation." Tesoro looked at Alara. She stepped forward. She had Lucien's jacket still draped over one arm, the navy dress, the hair that had come slightly loose over the course of the evening. She looked, by every surface measure, like a woman who had been through a difficult night. But she stood in the center of Tesoro's office the way she had stood at the Hargrove Gala's east window, with the particular upright stillness of a person who knows exactly where they are and has decided to be there. "My name is Eleanor Voss," she said. "You've been looking for me for 4 years. You found me tonight. I know that feels like a significant position to be in." She paused. "I'm here to tell you it isn't." Tesoro's jaw shifted slightly. "Everything I know about the Meridian Accord, every name, every mechanism, every financial routing, every government official with exposure, has been distributed tonight to 7 independent parties who are not connected to each other and who have instructions about what to do with that information if they don't hear from me personally within 48 hours. She held his gaze without blinking. "Killing me now doesn't suppress the information. It releases it." The room was completely still. "Additionally," she said, "Lucien Moretti has spent the last 4 years building operational intelligence on the de Cortez family's financial infrastructure, which includes, as of approximately 3 years ago when de Cortez began laundering Accord money through shell structures in 3 port cities, direct exposure to the same liability chain that the Accord parties have been paying people like you to manage." She tilted her head. "You are sitting in the middle of a collapsed structure, Frank. The only question is whether you're under it when it falls." Tesoro's face was doing very little, but his hands, Lucien noticed, his hands on the desk surface had gone flat. The same tell Alara's hands had given at the Gala when they went still. Control under pressure, indistinguishable from calm unless you knew what to look for. "What do you want?" Tesoro said. "The names above you," she said. "The Accord's current active parties. The ones still in government positions. You give me those names on record tonight, and I give you documentation that removes you from the primary liability chain. You become a peripheral figure with plausible operational distance." She paused. "Or you don't. And in 47 hours and 30 minutes, people who are not me and are not Lucien decide what happens to those names and to yours." Tesoro looked at Lucien. "She always like this?" he said. "I don't know," Lucien said. "I've been underestimating her for 11 months." Tesoro looked back at Alara. Something moved across his face, a long internal calculation running at speed behind his eyes. And then the window behind the barman exploded inward. Not glass, the frame, the whole section of it, blown by something external, and the barman went sideways off the couch arm, and the cold night air of the 31st floor came screaming into the room, and in the corridor behind Lucien, the service elevator dinged and the doors opened and 2 men came through them fast. Not Tesoro's men. Different men. Configured differently. Tighter. More deliberate. The movement pattern of people who had been outside this building for the last 40 minutes, waiting for exactly the right moment. De Cortez's direct operation. Not Tesoro's contractors. The principals. Tesoro was on his feet. "I didn't," he started. "I know you didn't," Alara said. She was already moving, not toward the door, not toward the window, toward the desk, toward Tesoro's desk specifically, and Lucien went for the 2 men from the elevator with the focused explosive efficiency of a man who has done this before and knows that the first 3 seconds are the only seconds that matter. The first man was bigger and had his weight forward, and Lucien used that, drove an elbow into the inside of his lead arm, folded his momentum against him, put him into the door frame hard enough that the impact made a sound that wasn't good, and the man went down and stayed there. The second man adjusted faster than expected, trained, not just large, and caught Lucien across the left side of his ribcage with something that detonated white through his vision and dropped him to one knee. He heard Tesaro shout something, heard the corner man move. He got up because staying down was not available. The second man came again and Lucien caught his wrist and twisted, leverage and direction, and the specific knowledge of how joints fail, and the man's face said things his mouth didn't before he went down to the carpet. Lucien's ribs were screaming. He breathed through it, short, controlled, the way you breathe when breathing fully is going to cost you more than you want to pay. He turned. The window man was at the broken frame, looking down, which meant there were more people below. The corner man was between him and the desk. Tesaro was behind the desk, and Alara was also behind the desk, and he blinked, she had Tesaro's phone, his personal phone from the desktop charging stand, and she was doing something on it with the fast, concentrated attention of a person who has maybe 90 seconds to do something that Alara had 90 seconds, and she used all of them. Tesaro's phone was a recent model with biometric lock, which meant it was locked, which meant she needed Tesaro's thumb, which meant she needed Tesaro to cooperate in the middle of a room where two men were down and a third was between her and everything, and the sound of people climbing the building's exterior service ladder was audible through the broken window frame. "Your thumb," she said to Tesaro. He stared at her. "Frank." Her voice cut through everything else in the room. The wind from the broken window, the groaning of the man Lucien had put into the door frame, the distant sirens that were either coming here or going somewhere else, and there was no way to know which. "Your thumb on this screen right now, or everything I just offered you disappears." He put his thumb on the screen. It unlocked. She went into his sent messages and found what she needed in 40 seconds. A chain of communications going back 11 months, coded but not well coded. The kind of coding that assumes no one will ever look rather than the kind that assumes someone will. Names in the body text. Not initials, not references. Names. Spelled out because Tesaro was a man who had operated for so long without consequences that he had stopped fully respecting the possibility of them. She forwarded the entire chain to 3 addresses she had memorized 6 years ago and had never used and had kept current through means that were her own business. Then she took a photograph of the screen showing the sent confirmation and forwarded that too. 58 seconds. She set the phone face down on the desk and looked at Tesaro and said, "It's done. Your name is in that chain, but peripheral. If you cooperate from this point forward, peripheral is where it stays." Tesaro looked at her with the expression of a man who has just watched someone dismantle the architecture of his safety in under a minute using his own hardware. "You had those addresses memorized," he said. "Yes. For 6 years. My father was a thorough man," she said. "He raised me accordingly." Yet, the corner man made his decision in the way that cornered men make decisions, without enough information and with too much adrenaline. And he moved toward Lucien from the left. Lucien was still managing his ribs. The movement sent a white flare up his left side that he absorbed through his jaw and his hands, and he caught the corner man's arm and redirected him with the minimum necessary force, which was still considerable force, and the man hit the desk edge and went down hard and stayed down, making a sound that indicated he was conscious, but reconsidering his choices. Through the broken window, the climbing sound stopped. Then a head appeared at the window frame, a man coming over the sill from the exterior ladder, one leg already inside the room, his eyes adjusting to the light. He saw Lucien. Lucien crossed the room in 5 steps and hit the window frame with his shoulder, driving it back against the man's body. And the man outside made a compressed, breathless sound and lost his grip on the inner frame, and there was a long, terrible second of nothing, and then the sound of him finding the ladder again, 3 rungs down, holding on. Not falling, but not coming in either. Lucien held the broken frame closed with his body weight and looked back at the room. "We need to leave this building," he said. "Yes," Alara said. Tesaro. Tesaro was still behind his desk. His 3 men were various stages of incapacitated or reassessing. He looked at Lucien with the face of a man who has had a long and successful career built on reading situations accurately and is currently reading this one as accurately as it has ever been read. The de Cortez people outside, Lucien said. How many? I don't know exactly. Estimate. They sent 8 to your estate. They'd have kept at least 4 for follow, maybe 6. He paused. They didn't tell me they were moving tonight. The operation tonight, that was their escalation, not mine. My timeline was longer. Why the escalation? Tesaro looked at Alara. Because she talked to Marsh at the Gala. Orrin Marsh specifically. The moment she made contact with him, the senior Accord interest panicked. Marsh is the one person in that structure who could move the exposure from financial to criminal jurisdiction. He said it without apology, just information. They decided the timeline was blown and moved to direct action. Alara absorbed this without visible reaction. So Marsh is the key, she said. Marsh is one of 3 keys, Tesaro said. The other 2 are in the chain you just sent. I know, she said. I sent it to people who will know what to do with all 3. Tesaro looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed a key card and a separate phone, a basic model, a burner, and set them both on the desk in front of her. Building has a private garage, sub-level 2. The key card gets you through the fire door at the end of this corridor and down the internal stairs without hitting the main lobby. There are 2 cars in the garage. The gray one is mine. The black one belongs to the building. The gray one has a clean title and $40,000 in cash in the spare tire well. He paused. Consider it a gesture of good faith toward the peripheral arrangement. Alara took the key card, left the burner. Your men, Lucien said to Tesaro. They'll live. When they're functional, you tell them the operation is closed. All of them. Anyone de Cortez has on the perimeter of my estate, you make a call and you pull them out. Tesaro looked at him. De Cortez doesn't take orders from me. They take orders from the people above them. The people above them are currently in a chain of communications sitting in 3 separate inboxes belonging to people with federal jurisdiction. Lucian's voice was flat and very cold. In about 4 hours, de Cortez is going to have considerably more pressing concerns than my estate. But I want my perimeter clear before then. A long pause. Tesaro picked up his desk phone and dialed. Get. The internal stairs were concrete and cold, and their footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and Lucien's ribs made every flight a conversation with his own pain threshold. But the pain was also clarifying in the way that physical pain is always clarifying. It stripped everything down to what was actually happening, removed the distance between thought and body, put a person entirely in the present tense. He was in the present tense. Alara was slightly ahead of him on the stairs, and she set the pace without asking whether he could hold it, and he held it without telling her it cost something. Sub-level 2 was dim and smelled of motor oil and concrete, the close air of an underground space that doesn't move. The gray car was where Tesaro said it would be. Lucien got behind the wheel because his hands needed something to do, and she got in the passenger side, and the engine turned over clean, and the garage door responded to the key card, and they came up out of the building onto a side street that was empty and dark and wet. He drove east. Neither of them spoke for 6 blocks. Then Alara said, Your ribs. Bruised, not broken. How do you know? Broken feels different. She turned to look at him in the passing streetlight. He kept his eyes on the road. Where are we going? She said. I have a property on the North Shore, not registered to me directly. It's been empty for 2 years. I've been using it as an overflow storage facility, which means it has food, running water, heat, and no reason for anyone to associate it with me personally. He changed lanes. We go there. We wait for morning. We see what the chain of communications produces. She nodded. And after that, she said, not urgently, just the question, out in the air between them. He didn't answer immediately. The city moved past. The late-night city, sparse and raw. The stripped-down version that existed when the performance of daytime was over, and what was left was just the place itself, the bones of it, the wet streets, and the lit windows of people living their lives inside their own specific problems. After that, he said, is a different conversation. The North Shore property was a converted warehouse 3 blocks from the water, squat and unremarkable, the kind of building that had been many things and was currently nothing and attracted no attention. Lucien had the code. The interior was cleaner than a storage facility had any right to be. He had, she realized, not been entirely honest about what he used it for, or at least not complete, because there was a room in the back that was clearly set up for extended occupation: a proper bed, a bathroom, a kitchen with actual supplies. She looked at it and then looked at him. "Contingency planning," he said. "For what contingency?" "The general one," he said. "The one where things go wrong enough that you need somewhere no one is looking." She set Tesaro's keycard on the kitchen counter and sat down in one of the two chairs at the small table and looked at her hands. The navy dress was ruined. A tear at the hem from the tunnel. A smear of something dark along the left side that she didn't want to examine closely. Her shoes were destroyed. She had been running in formal shoes for the better part of an hour. Lucien found a first aid kit under the sink and put it on the table and sat across from her. "Let me see your hands," he said. She held them out. The tunnel had taken something from them. Small lacerations from the iron wheel lock, the wrung edges. Nothing serious, but his hands, when he examined hers, were careful and deliberate, and he cleaned the cuts with the focused attention of a man who needs something specific to do and has found it. She watched his face while he worked. He didn't look up. "At the estate," she said. "Before all of this. The 11 months. Did you know anything was wrong?" He was quiet for a moment, pressed gauze against her palm. "I knew something was off," he said. "I couldn't locate it. There are people in my house who don't fit their role perfectly. Carmen is significantly more educated than her position requires. Davy has a history he doesn't volunteer. I've always operated with a baseline level of people not being exactly what they present as. It's the nature of the environment." He paused. "You presented as less than you were. Most people present as more. That's what I didn't read correctly." "Because you weren't looking for someone presenting as less." "No." She was quiet. He finished with her hands and closed the first aid kit. "The Gala," she said. "When you decided to take me, what did you actually want?" He looked up then, met her eyes directly across the small table, in the kitchen of a building that existed to disappear into at 4:30 in the morning after the longest night either of them had navigated in recent memory. "I wanted to feel like myself again," he said. It came out flat, without excuse or elaboration, the tone of a man who has decided to be honest because the cost of dishonesty has become apparent. "I'd been losing ground for months, not territory, ground. The sense of my own authority, the rival families, the political setbacks. I wanted to walk into that room and do something that reminded everyone, including me, what I was. And humiliating me accomplished that. In theory, she repeated. In practice, he said, it accomplished something considerably more complicated." She looked at him for a long time. He didn't look away. "You were cruel," she said. "Not with heat, just accurately." "Yes. You've been cruel for a long time in a lot of directions to a lot of people." "Yes. And you're telling me that honestly because you've spent 6 years building a life on the premise that if you're going to survive, you need to see things as they are," he said. "I'm not going to offer you a version of me that isn't accurate. You'd see through it in about 30 seconds, and it would cost us both more than it's worth." She looked down at her bandaged hands on the table. Outside, the harbor was close enough to hear, faint, the water moving in the dark, the specific sound of a large body of water at rest. "I'm not the same person who came to work in your house 11 months ago," she said. "That person was surviving, managing, staying small enough to stay safe." She looked up. "I'm not sure I can go back to that." "I'm not asking you to." "You don't know what you're asking." "No," he said. "I don't. Not fully." He turned his coffee cup on the table surface, a slow half-rotation. "But I know what I'm not asking. I'm not asking you to be staff. I'm not asking you to be invisible or useful or appropriate. I'm not asking you to be a prop in someone else's performance." He paused. "I spent tonight watching you operate, and I'm telling you clearly that I have never in my life been in a room with someone who does what you do the way you do it. And I am not a man who says things like that." She was quiet for a long time. The kitchen was very still, the harbor outside. the dark. The accord parties, she said finally. The names in that chain. When morning comes and the people I sent them to begin moving on them, it's going to be a significant event. It's going to touch a lot of structures. Some of those structures are adjacent to yours. I know. It may create exposure for you. I know that too. I've been building something in this city for 20 years, he said. I built it on a specific foundation, and that foundation has cracks in it that I've been managing instead of repairing because repairing them would mean acknowledging they existed. He set down his cup. The Decortez operation walked into my house because they saw me as someone who could be used. That assessment was accurate. I intend to make it inaccurate. He looked at her. Whatever comes with the morning, whatever the accord exposure produces, I'd rather be in it clearly than manage the distance of it from a position I've been telling myself is solid. She looked at him. He looked back. Sleep, he said. There's a room in the back. It's a real bed. I'll take the chair. You have broken ribs. Bruised. Lucien. He almost smiled. Not quite, but the architecture of it was there in the lines around his mouth. The specific arrangement of a face that has forgotten how to do something and is beginning to remember. I've slept in worse chairs for worse reasons. She stood up from the table. At the doorway to the back room, she stopped and turned. Eleanor, she said. My name is Eleanor. You can use it. If you want to. He looked at her across the kitchen. Eleanor, he said. She went to bed. Hot. Morning came in the way it came to the North Shore in November. Gray first, the light arriving before the sun as a general brightening of the sky above the water, colorless and serious. Then slowly the color entered it, the faint amber of early light finding the water's surface and the warehouse windows and the wet street outside. Lucien had not slept. He had sat in the chair and managed his ribs and watched the gray turn amber and made 3 phone calls between 5 and 6 in the morning that told him what he needed to know. Reeves had been taken into custody by 2 of his own operatives, quietly, no incident. The estate's perimeter was clear. Tesaro had made his call. The north and south approach vehicles were gone before 3 in the morning. The house itself was intact. The forwarded communications chain had arrived where it needed to arrive. By 5:15, 2 of the names in Tesaro's chain had lawyers making emergency calls to numbers they'd hoped never to use. By 6, a third name had contacted a former colleague in a gesture that was transparent to anyone watching as the gesture of a person trying to establish distance from something that was about to become very visible. Ambassador Fitch sent a single text to the number Alara had used from Lucian's phone. It said, "Marsh is moving. The mechanism is engaged. Well done." Lucian read it and set the phone down and looked at the harbor light on the kitchen wall for a while. Eleanor came out of the back room at 6:40. She had found, somewhere in the warehouse's contingency stores, a plain gray sweatshirt that was 3 sizes too large, and she wore it over the ruined dress, and her hair was down properly now, loose, and she looked exactly like a person who had slept for 2 hours after the worst night of recent years. Which was to say she looked more real than he had seen her look in 11 months of daily proximity. She looked at his face and read it. "It's moving," she said. "It's moving." She poured water from the tap into the kettle and set it on the burner and stood with her back to him for a moment, both hands on the counter's edge. "My father died believing the accord would be exposed eventually," she said to the window above the sink. "He said institutions don't actually protect secrets. They just make them heavier until they collapse under the weight." She paused. "He was right. He was usually right. It just took longer than he thought." "How long did he think?" 3 years. It took 10. She turned around. "He would have found that funny, I think. He had a very dry sense of what was funny." Lucian looked at her. "Tell me about him." She looked back at him with an expression that was very still and very open. The 2 things simultaneously, in the way that openness requires stillness as its precondition. "Later," she said. "I will. Later." The kettle began. Toss. 3 weeks after the night of the Hargrove Gala, a coordinated set of disclosures from 3 separate sources triggered a formal investigation into the financial structures underlying what journalists inevitably named the Meridian Network. The name came from documents. The documents came from people. The people were not identified in the initial reporting. Two senior figures with government adjacency resigned within days of each other, citing personal reasons. A third retained counsel and said nothing publicly. Frank Tesaro's name appeared briefly in one article as a peripheral financial conduit, and then did not appear again, which was consistent with a peripheral arrangement and which Tesaro, by all available evidence, had decided to honor. The de Cortez family's Eastern operations came under federal scrutiny that had nothing specifically to do with Eleanor Voss and everything to do with financial records that had been sitting, flagged, in various institutional systems for years, waiting for someone with sufficient clearance and sufficient motivation to act on them. The motivation arrived from three directions at once, which is the only way motivation of that kind arrives. Marcus pled to a reduced charge in a private proceeding. He was not a violent man, and the case against him was complex, and the people handling the complexity had their own considerations about what was useful to pursue and what was not. He served a period of monitored restriction and then went somewhere quiet and was not heard from again in any context that touched Lucia Moretti's world. Reeves was a more complicated matter and took longer, and the resolution of it was not clean, but it was final. Carmen stayed. Davi stayed. Tina stayed. The small storage room behind the kitchen, the one with the water heater and the shelf of cleaning supplies and the cot wedged between them, was cleared out in December. The water heater was moved, the shelf was removed. The room was given a window and a proper door and a purpose that was not storage. Nobody asked what the purpose was. It was understood, in the way that things are understood in households where people pay attention, that the room had been claimed by someone who would not be using a cot anymore, and who was, by extension, no longer staff. Yes. The harbor dinner happened in February, not October, as the story's earlier arc might have suggested, because things in real life land in February when they are supposed to land in October, and the delay is itself part of the story, the time it takes for the smoke to clear and the truth to settle into its actual shape. The restaurant was on the fourth floor of a building that overlooked the harbor. Small, no chandeliers, the kind of place that valued the quality of what it served over the performance of serving it. 12 people at a long table. Lucien had planned it as a business dinner, a restructuring conversation with several of the legitimate infrastructure figures he'd been renegotiating relationships with in the months since the gala. It had evolved, in the way that things evolve when someone with Eleanor Voss's particular gift for room management is involved in the planning, into something that was still a working dinner but was also something more layered than that. Ambassador Fitch was there, Patricia Solis, a man named Werner who ran a maritime logistics network and had been in Lucien's peripheral orbit for years without the two of them ever finding a context for direct conversation. Two of Lucien's operational people who had passed whatever assessment Eleanor had been running on them, quietly, for the past 3 months. Halfway through the main course, Werner said something to Eleanor about the current state of transatlantic regulatory alignment that triggered a conversation that ran for 45 minutes and that Lucien largely listened to because listening to her work, the precision of it, the way she moved through complex information like water finding level, was something he had not yet stopped finding remarkable. He didn't think he was going to stop. Fitch, at some point during the conversation, caught Lucien watching her and caught Lucien catching himself watching her, and produced briefly the almost smile he'd produced at the gala 4 months ago. She asked me that question in Lisbon when she was 17, Fitch said quietly to Lucien alone. About transitional justice mechanisms. The moderator dismissed it because she was young and because he wasn't listening carefully enough. He looked at Eleanor across the table. 27 years later, watching the same person work a room, still the same question at the center of it. What does it take to actually repair something? He paused. Not just survive it, repair it. Lucien looked at Fitch and then back at Eleanor. I don't have a full answer to that, he said. No, Fitch said, neither do I. But I think it's the right question. The harbor was visible through the restaurant's windows. Oh, the dark water, the lit bridges, the city on both sides of it going about its business with the indifference that cities maintain toward individual lives, no matter what those individual lives contain. The lights moved on the water moved under the lights. After dinner, When the table had broken into smaller conversations and the wine had moved to the end of its useful life and the room had reached the particular temperature of an evening that has been good and is acknowledging it, Lucien stood near the window and Eleanor came to stand beside him. Not close enough to be a statement, close enough to be a choice. They stood and looked at the harbor. "Werner wants to talk to you directly," she said, "about the port restructuring, not through me. He said that specifically. He wants to negotiate with you." "That's new. You've been different the last 3 months. People notice when a person becomes worth negotiating with directly instead of working around." He looked at her. She was looking at the harbor. In the window's reflected light, she looked like someone who had arrived at a place she'd been moving toward for a long time and had not yet fully processed what it felt like to be there. Not happy, exactly, and not at peace, exactly, but something more durable than either. Present, real. Taking up the space she occupied without apology or performance. "I owe you a conversation," he said. "Several." "The first one," he said. "The one from the car. What you want. What comes next. What this is." She was quiet for a moment. The harbor moved. The lights moved. "I know what it's not," she said. "It's not what it was. It's not a man and his housemaid. It's not someone with leverage over someone who needs that leverage. It's not a transaction." She paused. "I've spent 6 years in transactions. I know what they feel like." "So what is it?" She turned to look at him, directly without the careful management of her gaze that had been the default for so long that unmanaged looking was its own act. "I don't know yet," she said. "I know what I want it to be. I know what I think it could be, if both people are honest about what it costs and what it requires and what neither of them is able to give." She held his gaze. "Are you an honest man, Lucien?" He thought about this. Actually thought. Not the reflex denial and not the reflex affirmation. "No," he said. "Not historically. Not consistently. I've been a precise man and a careful man and a man who understood the value of controlling what information went where. Honesty is a different discipline, and I am not practiced at it." He paused. "I am, apparently, willing to try." Something moved across her face that was not the almost smile, and not the careful social ease of the gala, and not the stripped-down flatness of the tunnel, and the running, and the fear managed into function. Something older than all of it, and quieter. "That's a better answer than yes would have been," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside, the harbor went on doing what harbors do, absorbing the light, holding the cold, carrying everything that moved across it toward wherever everything was going, indifferent and vast and patient in the way that water is patient, which is without effort or intention, simply by existing long enough. Inside, a room full of people who had survived various specific versions of the same general condition, the condition of being human and making choices and living with what those choices produced, finished their wine and talked about the things they were going to do next. At the window, 2 of them stood in the particular quiet of people who have been through something together and are standing at the far end of it, looking at what comes after. There was no announcement, no applause, no chandeliers dropping 14,000 crystals in a cascade. Just the harbor, the light on the water, the city going about its business, and Eleanor Voss, who had spent 6 years becoming invisible and one night becoming impossible to ignore, standing in a room she had chosen to be in, next to a man who had finally, imperfectly, incompletely, in the slow and costly way that real things happen, learned to see her. Not as staff, not as a prop, not as something useful or convenient or available, as the person she was. That was enough to start with. It was all things considered considerably more than either of them had started with before.